So I just finished rewatching all of the Family Matters and I have a lot of thoughts. First things first, I thoroughly enjoyed it, and for some reason that was a bit of a surprise for me. I think it's because a lot of the people around me, when they talk about this show, they're kind of remembering it just from their memory and their childhood, and they talk about it in a way where it doesn't sound like it was a good show. But there were many times when I laughed out loud, like many, many times when I laughed out loud, and I had a great time watching it. So, yeah, it was great. Let's backtrack a bit. If you don't know what Family Matters is or just need a bit of a refresher, it is about the Winslow family, the parents, Harriet and Carl. It starts off with them having three kids, Eddie, Laura, and Judy. And then Judy magically disappears. She goes upstairs and doesn't come back down. Also living with them is Carl's mother, Estelle, and Harriet's sister Rachel, and her son Richie. And the most famous character on the show would be Steve Urkel. Now, the show went to have 9 seasons, and it's actually a spinoff of Perfect Strangers, which is something that you probably wouldn't know if you didn't watch Perfect Strangers. And the show is currently the third longest running sitcom with an all black cast, only being beaten out by House of Pain and The Jeffersons. Yeah, so that is the rundown of Family Matters. And it's a very successful show as it has gotten 9 seasons. But there are some things that I think hindered it from getting season 10, 11, 12, so on and so forth. So let's get into it. One of those things, and probably one of the most talked about things about this show, is the fact that they swapped actors for Harriet during the series. And in my big adult age, after rewatching the show and considering some things which I will share, I've come to realize that I'm willing to give this change a bit more grace. Let me tell you why. First things first, Joe Marie Payton originated the role on Perfect Strangers in 1987 and then didn't leave the role until 1997 on Family Matters. She was on 11 episodes in season 9, and that was it. And then Judy Ann Elder came in to play Harriet for the rest of the episodes in season 9. So now on to why I'm willing to give it a bit more grace. Um, Peyton played Harriet for an entire decade. She was that role. So, with her wanting to leave the show, anyone coming into that role was automatically going to have a challenge. Peyton made that role what it was, and of course, she had amazing chemistry that was developed over the course of that entire decade with the entire cast of the show that Elder was just never going to have. So, in stepping into the role of Harriet, Elder's job was extremely difficult because she had to step into this iconic role and not imitate what Peyton did over the course of that entire decade and somehow find a way to make it her own, even though she was only coming in the tail end of the final season of the show. It's hard to make a character your own when you're only in it for 9 episodes versus Peyton's 200 plus episodes of playing Harriet. And the second thing is this. Now, I have taken many acting classes all through high school in my adulthood, and so I understand that when it comes to acting, intuition is a big thing. But it's also a thing that can't be replicated person to person. You can study the breakdown of that character for as long and as much as you want, but the interpretation will be different depending on who is stepping into that role. And so, considering all that, I feel like it's a little unfair to compare the two and to just, let it slide. It's just 9 episodes that we have to have in the final season of a different actor playing this character, so I can be less or not at all mad about the whole situation. Now, I know there are probably many different solutions to dealing with Peyton leaving the role of Harriet, but at the end of the day, it is a lose lose situation, and whatever solution you think could work, there's going to be a bunch of people who are going to hate it. So it really doesn't matter what they did, it was not going to be liked by a bunch of people. Okay, now let's talk about Steve. The first thing I want to say about him is so many people describe him as just this annoying pest of a neighbor, but I personally feel like after rewatching the whole thing, that everything he did came from a place of deep love and care for the Winslows. It just so happens that he is extremely clumsy, and so everything he does pretty much ends up in these major accidents that destroy parts of, if not all of, their homes. But nothing that he did was out of malicious intent. He wasn't trying to purposefully destroy people's lives and homes. It just so happened that everything ended up being that way. Now let's move on to how they made him basically the star of the show, because I think this is one of the major things that they got wrong. So, as some people know, Steve Urkel wasn't a part of the original cast, and they brought him in later in season 1, and everyone loved him, so they kept him on as a regular. And I think they should have just stopped there, but they took it a whole step further as basically making the show more about him and his antics, especially with Carl, versus just being about the Winslow family. And this was so extreme to the point where there were definitely like quite a few episodes where there was just a main A plot that just focused on him and most likely Carl or Eddie getting into some kind of antics and ignoring the rest of the cast. But really, in the later seasons, all of the A plots were about Steve, and the other cast was kind of like pushed to the side. So, in my opinion, I feel like he should have just been like this adopted child of the Winslows, so the focus could still stay on the family and just have him be just another one of their kids, in a sense. And in that way, all of the kids, and even more so just the rest of the cast, would get more so of an equal time with everyone else, which does lead me to my next point, which is talking about the kids on the show. So when it comes to the kids on Family Matters, I want to focus in on Richie and Judy, because one of the mistakes I think they made was aging them up after the first season. Richie went from being like a 6-month old to being a toddler, and they did switch the actor for Judy, and she was older. Well, at least she seemed and looked older than the original actor that was in that role. Now, because Richie got aged up, he got to play off of all of the other kids on the show, but Judy only really got to play off of Richie because they were the ones who were closer in age. Now, if they had kept Richie as being like the 6-ish month old that he was when the series started, that would have given so much potential for Judy to play off of her other siblings. I mean, you could have had the older role model sister, younger sister who wants to be like her and follows her around all of the time dynamic with Laura and Judy, and kind of parallel them with Harriette and Rachel, and them getting close as they grow as sisters. And then with Eddie, he could just be that protective big brother that looks out for her in life, like if she experiences bullies or anything like that. And I know he liked basketball in this series, so maybe she could have liked basketball too, and that could have been the thing that they bonded over. Then maybe Judy could have gotten to come back down the stairs when she went up instead of just staying on the second floor for forever and eternity. And then with Richie, if they had have kept him being a baby, you could just have seen all of the three kids trying to help take care of him, change his diapers. There could have been an episode where all the parents went out and left the kids alone to take care of Richie, and disaster strikes as it usually does on these types of sitcoms. It's just so much potential that you could have done there. And of course, we know that Richie kind of like became another sibling for them anyway, but seeing that go from like baby all the way up to like childhood could have made it a little bit more deeper. And the last thing that I want to talk about with Family Matters is the love triangle square thing with Steve, Myra, Laura, and Stefan. Very confusing, my god. So it was very apparent to me that Steve and Laura were meant to be. And I think the whole moral of the story that they were trying to do was, just because you have someone that seems to be perfect for you or is like exactly like you, it doesn't mean that that's the person that you should end up with or that you're going to be in love with. The heart wants what the heart wants. Now, I know there are some people who are probably going to be really angry with Steve for being with Myra for all of that time, even though he was totally and completely in love with Laura. But first things first, when he met Myra, they were like, I can't exactly remember if they kissed or if they were about to kiss, but in that moment, Steve had shut everything down and was like, I'm not going to be with you because I'm in love with Laura. And then Myra was gone. And when she came back, Steve basically sat her down with Laura in the room and was like, I'm going to drop you like a hot potato if Laura ever shows an ounce of like towards me. So it's your choice whether you want to date me or not. And she decided to still date him. So can't really be mad at him because she knew what she was getting into. Also, Steve and Myra were never really on like the same page when it came to like the progression of their relationship. There was definitely an episode in the later seasons where she walks in with a wedding dress and is like, this is for our wedding. And Steve is like, what are you talking about? Who said we were getting married? Or I didn't even propose to you. Like, what are you even doing? So she kind of just jumped the gun and moved pretty fast in that sense. And he was just like, nah, I don't think so. Now, I do think that the show should have showed Steve grappling with the choice of does he pick the person who was like love at first sight, has loved her for all of his adolescence and teenage and adult years, or the person who everyone says is perfect for him. If we actually got to see scenes with him actually talking to people like Eddie or Carl or even Harriette about that, it would have felt a little better when he kind of like broke up with Myra and finally decided to propose to Laura. I also feel like Laura's attraction to Steve should have started earlier in the series. So the two of them ended up going to senior prom together, and that night they shared a kiss, and it was like Steve seemed like a completely different person, and Laura was fine with it. And I think that's when the seed should have been planted for her, and they should have seen her being like right after that when they graduated high school, when she was like, she should have been like, oh, I think I have feelings for him. I think I'm attracted to him. Like, what is going on? Because it happened in like season 9, I believe, of the show. And so that whole season is just her going back and forth between Stefan and Steve, and then at the end she accepts Steve's proposal and not Stefan's. And it was just too fast. Like they needed to just slow it down and have it progress over more seasons. So it should have started when they went on their senior prom. And also in that season, Steve decides to change his look and he completely ditches the suspenders and he's trying all of these different styles and even tries to like change his voice at some point. And so with Laura's attraction happening then, it feels like the reason why she's attracted to him is because he's changing himself. When if you actually go back and look at the episode, he did it on his own accord for himself, not to impress any other person. So, yeah, those are all of my thoughts on Family Matters. I think that's all of my thoughts on Family Matters for now, let's just say. But let me know in the comments your thoughts. Have you recently rewatched the show or just rewatched it in your adulthood and see it completely different from when you did when you were much younger? Let me know how you feel about that in the comments. Until next time, I'll see y'all later.